Hi, this is Joe Ziemba, the host of When Football Was Football here on the Sports History Network. Aside from my podcasting duties, I'm also a sports collector. And as such, I'm very pleased to share the exciting news that the Sports History Network has partnered with Rochester Sports Autographs, the largest JSA authenticated autograph distributor in the United States, where you can get deals on over 30,000 autograph sports collectibles. So as a collector, I was very pleased when I visited the site of Rochester Sports Autographs. The massive inventory is easy to search, carefully documented, and visually appealing. The options seem limitless, whether you're looking for an autographed baseball, signed football helmets, or basketball jerseys, among thousands of others. I found everything from a Babe Ruth autograph, a signed football by Dick Butkus, and an autographed Larry Bird basketball jersey. And as a collector, you'll be delighted with the very competitive pricing on JSA authenticated products. Made possible since RSA deals directly with athletes, so there's no extra markup, and the savings are passed on directly to the customer. Perhaps you're looking for an early gift for Mother's Day or Father's Day. Heck, who needs a holiday as an excuse to give a piece of sports history to your loved ones? Or how about yourself? Today seems like a great day to add to your own sports collection, right? RSA even has film, music, and other entertainment autographs on the site, so there's something for everyone. All orders from Rochester Sports Autographs are top quality and shipped to your door with top authentication and a money-back guarantee. And to make sure RSA knows that the Sports History Network sent you, we created a special link for you. All you need to do is head to shoprsa.com/SHN. That's shoprsa.com/SHN to get your own piece of sports history today.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
On February 11, 1992, a trade occurred in the NFL that changed the course of my team and this week's guest team for years to come. Let's just say I was on the raw end of that deal. But the trade helped this week's guest grow up, never knowing a season with a lackluster QB under center. That QB's name? Well, it was Mr. Brett Favre. Welcome to Fantasy Football Origin Stories, where each episode is a journey back in time to explore the unique experiences of some of the coolest and most influential people in the fantasy football industry. I'm your host, Arnie Chapman, also known as the Football History Dude. Now, I love fantasy football, and I want you to come along with me to explore the yesteryear of the armchair gridiron. So hop on board my DeLorean, and let's get this baby up to 88 miles per hour. This time to step up the DeLorean. The date is September 20th, 1992, and we are at Lambeau Field watching the Green Bay Packers take on the Cincinnati Bengals. The Pack started off with losing 2 games to start off the season, and who knew what was going to happen the rest of that year? Then early in the game, the quarterback, Don Magic Man Majikowski, goes down to injury. Does that mean that the season is over for the Packers? No chance for a playoff contention? I mean, it was 10 years since they made the playoffs before that. I know. It's kind of like the Lions fans nowadays, and I'm all like, just like, hey, screw you, buddy. No time to think about it, though. Let's see what this Favre kid can do. Yeah, I said Favre at the intro, but that's just because it's just fun making fun of the Brett Favre and all these guys. Well, let's just say he ended up leading the Pack to their first victory of the season, en route to making the playoffs and earning his first Pro Bowl bid as a sophomore in the NFL. After that, we all know the rest is history. 3 decades of having one of the top QBs in the league at the Packers' Lambeau Field, from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. Who knows what's going to happen here in 2023? But back to that 1992 season. Here's your fantasy football history lesson for the day. Emmitt Smith was number 1 overall. That's when the Cowboys won the Super Bowl, too. Thurman Thomas, number 2. Then Barry Foster of the Steelers, followed up by Terry Allen of the Vikings. Then at number 5 was the great wide receiver Sterling Sharp, the top wide receiver of the year. Could he have held that spot with Magic Man under center? Maybe. But that year proved to be an immediate connection with Brett Favre. Something that is similar to recent years of Rodgers to Adams. Again, now we get to see what happens over in New York. Will Garrett Wilson have the top reigning season as a wide receiver? We'll have to check on that later in the year. But back to this week's guest. We find out in the episode, unfortunately, he's a Packers fan, but we won't hold that against him. We somehow get past that and talk some fantasy football origin stories with Jake from Jake's Fantasy Football, found over at jakesffootball.com. But before we get into that conversation, now is a good time for me to remind you that if you like this show, you gotta make sure you share it with at least one friend, maybe 2, maybe 3. Heck, you might as well share it with your whole fantasy football league. And if you have not subscribed for free to this show, you might as well follow and subscribe in your podcast player of choice. That way you get the hottest, freshest off the press episodes, well, each and every week. But now that you've broadcast this podcast across your network and into your league mates' ears, let's get into the interview with Jake from Jake's Fantasy Football. Well, let's just start right there so we can get this thing rolling. Let's go back to, what is your first memory of just ever playing fantasy football?
The first time I got into fantasy football, I was in middle school with my friends, and my friend's like, hey, my dad can get us on this website to sign us up for football, and he'll be the commissioner, and we'll play against him, and we'll find 10 people and whatever. So that's kind of how it got started. And then the way it went for me is like the top, 7 or 8 guys I drafted all got injured and were out for the season. It was fantastic. And then I hit the waiver wire and tried to win and watched a lot of football and got really into it. And I guess it's like the more you watch, the better you get at it, and the better you're at it, the more you want to watch, and you just kind of go into this and never-ending spiral of getting more and more into football for a while.
And you're going down that little toilet bowl where it's like you're going faster and faster, and by the time you can't get back out of it, kind of deal.
Well, right, yeah. Now it's just like a routine of life.
Yeah, and now that because of Dynasty and all this other stuff, best ball, it's like it's year round, including the NFL draft. It's like you never really your head doesn't go away or stop thinking about it.
Exactly. It's like, okay, now that the season's over, what do I start thinking about right now? Instead of, some people are just like, oh no, poor me, post-football depression. And it's like, well, I think I had that once.
Yeah.
But now it's like, football's done. Let's just watch a bunch of highlights and things so this feeling doesn't go away.
Yeah, no, especially, so actually I should have probably asked you this. What NFL team are you a fan of?
Well, I'm here in Wisconsin, and I was born here, so I'm
my gosh,
obligated to be a Packers fan.
I knew where that was going. So I have to show you.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'm a Lions fan, so we'll talk about that as we go. I'm actually looking at 2 nostalgic cups. I'm looking at a sweater. I'm looking at everything this Lions. I picked up a little bit of some kind of accent from over there, but
oh wait, this is backwards.
Wisconsin State Fair. Okay, well, you know what? We'll just let it slide for a little bit that you're a Packers fan, and we'll let you stay in the show, just considering Rodgers is left and everything. With that being said, what, from a local longtime fan, are your opinions of like what's coming up the season or what the whole Rodgers thing? Just open board, what happened there?
So, Rodgers just came off of a funky season where, obviously he lost Devontae Adams, so that didn't help. And then, his replacement was Christian Watson, who started the season not really playing all the way and recovering from surgery, so that wasn't good. And then, you had Dobbs and Cobb and, and Lazard, and none of them played every game, and it was just like, and then Rodgers hurt his thumb, and it was just like, oh, geez. And then there are games where the Packers were going against teams that were bad against the run, and you could run all over them, and they'd run the ball like 15 times, and they'd get a lead, and they'd keep throwing the ball a lot and eventually lose the game. It was like, what are you doing? And then that kind of stuff makes me think like maybe, LaFleur isn't that good, and Rodgers and Adams have been making him look good for the past couple of years. Sort of same thing with McCarthy beforehand was, Rodgers made him look really good as a coach, So we'll see, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of those deals where as a Lions fan, I've been so used to it my whole life of like they might get up, but then they didn't. I used to always say like they don't.
Oh, God.
Yeah, they're not like Belichick. Like he'll put his foot on your throat and he won't let up. He'll put that pedal to the metal and they'll run up the score, whereas the Lions were always playing not to lose as opposed to playing to win. And, I hate to say it, but we're taking the division this year. I know this is not fantasy football, but
there's a pretty good chance of that. Yeah, sure. I mean, I've thought that in the past. When it's like, hey, they've got a lot of good pieces. They look pretty good, and it's like then they'd stink again and be like, oh, okay, well, never mind.
Yeah,
I don't know how that happened.
It's one of those deals where I can talk junk all I want, but my entire life as a Lions fan, I've beaten the Packers. I could probably count it on two hands of my fingers, my entire life here. And I went from having to deal with Favre to dealing with Rodgers basically my entire life that I can remember football. So
yeah, right. I've got the same problem of going from one good quarterback to a better one. And now it's just like, is Love just gonna step in and be awesome? That'd be great, but I don't know.
Yeah, we'll find out. It's one of those.
We haven't seen him play very much.
Yeah, it's you're in an awkward position on the opposite end of me. It's kind of like how when Patriots fans lost Brady, it's like, okay, what's the next chapter? Especially these kids that were maybe 20, 25 years old. Like they didn't know anything better. They didn't know anything other than basically winning the division and probably making a playoff run and potentially winning the Super Bowl like basically every year for their whole life.
Right, being in the Super Bowl like what, every other year at least?
On average, it was at least that, I think, for his career there.
I think,
But enough. Let's quit talking about Brady. Let's for sure quit talking about the Packers. Let's go back to fantasy football. Let's talk about maybe some of your favorite, a personal gem that you found in the late rounds, or your favorite fantasy football player that you hung on to just because you really liked him on your team, no matter what your flag plant person throughout your life.
Well, I mean, for late picks, I tend to get some every year that I'm into, but then what happens is, they're only a good late stash for a year. But then a lot of times those guys sort of are like, everything around them gets set up for a nice season for them. And then some of those things fall apart and then they never have that again. But yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of those one-hit wonders, and then,
Let me rephrase that question.
Yeah, it's just...
what about a player... Don't think about, like, the one-hit wonders or maybe the value drafts, but, like, okay, now let's talk about maybe a player that you've always... Like, for me, for the longest time, it was Peyton Manning, no matter what. Like, I didn't care. I had to take him. Like, who was your player you really want on your team every year? That's not a Packer. Like we can't go homer this.
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, I was never a homer, luckily, so that was good. But, sometimes it works for people. I've seen it happen, like if you draft a lot of the same guys on the same team and that team is really good that year, it works, but it doesn't always happen. But no, for me, I mean, I don't usually try to do it that way, and I don't usually get all that attached to one specific player like that, and being in a lot of leagues, you don't always have the same pick, so you can't get the same guy usually. But what I would say is I do end up getting a lot of Travis Kelce just about every year. So, that makes sense. It's like if I have a late end of the first round pick, start of the second round, it's like I'm always going to grab him there because he's just been so ridiculous and reliable. And, he only had that 1 year where he wasn't the top tight end.
Yeah, I mean, he's been basically a cheat code for, we're going on 7 years probably. I don't know how many when he started his run there, but it's hard to argue against that. It's kind of a cheat move, though, because you pick like the top dog at like a position for the last 6 years, but that's okay. I mean, you kind of you led into maybe one of the next questions that I wanted to get at. Like you said, if he's there at the end of the first, early second, maybe I'm taking Kelce, but like, do you have a particular draft strategy or like mentality that you go into drafts, or is it totally fluid?
I think what people like to call it is they call it value-based drafting, which is you pick the guy who's most valuable to you or to your team at that point. So it's not like, you have to pick a running back or like you want to do the zero running back or whatever. It's like, you want to pick the guy who scores the most points for your team. That's what you want to do. And then, yes, certain positions are worth more or less depending on, how many you already have and how many you have to start on your roster and things like that. So that's why running backs they have a lot of value, because if you get a really good one, everybody usually has to start at least 2, and there's not 20 super good running backs in the league,
Yeah, going back to the Lions, I mean, maybe not a value base, because when I saw them pick them in the real life NFL draft, that is, I was like, why would you take a running back at 12 and then a linebacker at whatever?
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm at the mentality now. I'm like, screw the rest of the world. Detroit versus everybody. Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. I believe in them, and we're coming after Green Bay. You better watch out and hide for the hills.
I heard some things about the draft with the Lions and picking Gibbs, and a lot of people felt that was high. But what I had heard was they were trying to trade back, and they had some more trade back plans or something like that, and it didn't work out. So then they're like, all right, we're getting our guy.
Yeah, I mean, draft with
that makes
conviction.
sense.
I mean, that's with fantasy football or not. I'm with you. I had thought and heard that as well, and that's something that night as I pondered, I'm like, you know what? Because everybody at work, that I'm known as the Lions guy, so of course everybody in the world asked me, "What'd you think of the draft?" And that was what I said Friday morning. I'm like, you know what? They probably were trying to trade back, and they knew they wanted a guy. They went after him. Dan Campbell, he drafts with conviction. So does Brad Holmes. So let's go after it. And I think,
well, right. And then the other thing that we don't know is, like, what other teams were looking at him, and who else wanted him, and what pick did they have, and so it could have been the next team. I don't know.
You never know, and some other team could have leapfrogged him even if they did trade back, and whatever. Man, it's not sitting here in middle of May, being able to make it a worthwhile decision if it was a good pick or not. We'll find out when the helmets strap on and the pads start to fly. We'll see what goes on. And I think we play you week 4 at Green Bay, so we'll see what happens week 4, if I recall. But
we'll see.
Speaking of that's the future, so now what we're going to do is I'm trying to actually pull this out without wrecking my cords, but so you get to drive this thing right here. This is the DeLorean. So now you're going to go back in time. We're going to ride on this trip together back to when you decided, well, I'm going to start something at a website and anything else that's called Jake's Fantasy Football. Like, what was the origin story there?
So I was getting into a lot of leagues and hanging out with a lot of people, and like I did a lot of live drafts back then, and I'd take a lot of notes, and I'd make a lot of spreadsheets, and I'd try to talk to people about it, but I wouldn't want to talk to people who were in my leagues about it. So, so then I'd mostly try to talk to, like, my wife or whoever else who wasn't in my league that I could find that wanted to talk about it. And then my wife's like, I don't want to talk about this. Just go online and write something about it instead. I'm like, all right, I can just start throwing my thoughts out there. And, I mean, that's basically how it started.
Well, then so was it the website right away, or were you writing for other places first before you started your website?
No, I just started doing, it's really a blog. I started it as a blog kind of site, but that's just like a free website style you can use, and just started putting stuff out there, sort of like the basic things that I do or was doing to be better than most people at fantasy football, which was just like review what happened last season and then, try and guess at what's going to happen this next season. And, that has evolved a lot over time. Is like, is as I've been putting things out, I always review myself and like, hey, here were my ranks last year and here's what actually happened. And I'm like, okay, so that was wrong.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, all right, why did I do that? Why? Because like if you don't take it in the moment and like, here's what I'm thinking and here's why, here's what I think is going to happen because of these things. If you don't take that, down then somewhere and you just go through the season, you get to the end of the season, you're like, well, yeah, of course that happened. You have the hindsight bias and you can't, you're like, it feels so obvious now that all these players were good. And it's like, well, yeah, and now you have a lot better evidence to go off of. But usually there's some sort of cause and effect to it. And there's some intangible things, and there's a lot of things we don't get to see, but yeah. The biggest difference was when I started watching coaches a lot more, paying attention to who gets hired there and what they do and how they like to play their players. And it's like, oh, okay, that's, maybe the guys who tell them what to do are a good thing to look at, because it's like, oh, this coach likes to run the ball a lot. That running back stunk last year and nobody likes him. It's like, well, he's going to be good this year.
Right, yeah, with that opportunity.
Coach is going to use him differently, And the opposite happens too. The opposite happens a lot, and that really throws people for a loop. It's like, oh, this guy's been great the past couple of years. It's like, well, his offensive coordinator just left. Like, oh, okay. That's probably not good. If he's been great the past couple of years and now somebody else is calling the plays,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Follow it where, the strategy is going to be lying from the game planning and everything. You kind of touched on something there. Maybe this wasn't your intention, but it's almost like from what you said, in the moment, writing down why you're making these decisions and then referring back to them. It's almost like, was it like a journal based for yourself at this point you're talking about, or?
Yeah, kind of. It was kind of like that. It's like the whole point of my site is like, hey, here's how I do this, and here, like, sort of showing other people how I do it, and here's the information I use to get to this point. But even if you take my same information, you might not have the same opinion on it, That's the other thing. But it's like, at least you have it versus not having it. And that's the thing that a lot of people are like, oh, fantasy football, it's just 100% luck and there's no skill or thought to it. It's like, well, if I know something you don't know and it gives me a little advantage, well, that's not luck, Like, yeah, there's the every given Sunday thing, and where any random things happen, and then there's, all your players get injured, or you're the second highest scorer every week, so you end up with an 0-17 record, but the most points. That's a good one.
I've been there before. Yeah, I mean, never. I wouldn't say 0-17, but yes, I've been there. Really, a lot big losing, but yeah, being the highest scoring. Yeah, that's a bummer when that happens.
Yeah. Which is just like, oh, my team's good, but I can't win.
Yeah, I mean, so you put a lot of effort. I mean, just whether you wanted to, let's say, it's like the journal process or whatever it is, like even just your recent posts that you've been playing out there, we'll call it that way, with like kind of like the recapping, the additions and all that stuff. Like there's a lot of content in there. A, is it like a particular format that you've used year over year? And B, how do you, like, that's a lot of work. How do you put it all together?
So when I first did that, it changes every year. Like the first time I did it, I just did it with coaches. Like I didn't even do players. And then, I went back and looked at it and like it made a difference in how well I played. But it's like a lot of this information was all up here. It's like, I've watched this coach and I know generally what he does. And I'm going to put it down on paper and say, this coach is good at these things and you should do it. And then, that might not be convincing to somebody else. And then the year after, I was like, you know what? I should put players in here too, not just coaches. And I should put some stats around here too. And then, I was like, okay, all right, so here's the coach, here's the position group that they coach over, here's how good they are at what they do, or how they were last year. And here's what's changed since then. It's like, oh, they were the best at getting sacks in the league, and they lost 4 defensive ends this year. It's like, they probably won't be the best sack team in the league again the next year. But other people will just be like, they were great, so they're still going to be great. It's like, do you not see what changed here? And then, that's kind of how it's gone for me, is like, I'll do it one year and I'll write the whole series that way. And then the next year, as I'm like prepping it and looking at it, I'll look back at it and I'll think like, okay, what's missing here? What else does it need? And then I'll see if I can improve upon it and make like the same kind of template and make it better the next year. So this year what I did was I added in, there's websites where you can get depth charts that are from different times. So I did one from the start of the season, after the season, and after the draft. So you can see like who started the season, how is their team supposed to be, or what they were trying to do, who got hurt and or who, came in, took over, got better, etc. You can see that sort of with the depth chart. And then the who did they draft or sign that's now going to start. And that's kind of like the extra piece I added this year, was like, because I felt like I missed some things or didn't quite get the full context of, exactly how good a group was and who was in it, A lot of players to keep track of.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot going on there. Before I get into, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question there. I must note that in the Lions section under summary, you put the new coach improvement and new players should be a recipe for success, better in 2023. And we had a pretty good end of 2022. So thank you for telling us we're going to win the division. We can carry on to the next question.
I used to make like full-on predictions in there too, but like if a bunch of players get injured, then your prediction is just gone.
Right.
And it's like, who really cares what their record's going to be? It's like, is the team going to be better? And like sometimes it's like every team in one division, they all look better, and it's like, dang, like how do you pick based on how they did last year? How are they going to do this year? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a lot of. Well, if you had this DeLorean right here and go to the future with the Gray's Almanac, then you might get it figured out.
Right. Yeah. The Lions. Let's just hope those defensive changes work out for them.
Hey, there is no hope, baby.
Should.
Let's talk about the future. It's going to work out. So, why don't you give some love to some of those websites you were talking about, where you can get, just so they give them a shout out.
All right. I've been using overthecap.com for catching all the free agency moves, but I've noticed that's been a little behind sometimes. Let's see. I use Pro Football Reference a lot. If you've ever been to that site, that's a good site. Let's see. Our Lads is the one that they keep they take like a dump of the depth charts like once a month. Sometimes a little bit more than once a month.
Did you say Our Lads? Like hour and then Lads?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard of this one, actually.
So they have the depth chart pieces. And then I just, anywhere else I can get NFL.com, ESPN.com, where I can just pull, defensive stats, offensive stats for teams, things like that.
Okay. Yeah, no, like I said, I like to give love to different kind of resources and stuff out there from our guests. With that being said, so the resource that you run your website or your blog on, I mean, it's kind of unique. You can click on different versions like Magazine View or Flipkart. There's a bunch of others. Is this like a boxed type of blogger device, or what is it?
Yeah, it is that is Blogger. Yeah.
Okay.
I started it on Blogger. I used to have like a custom template for a while. And I don't know, just after a while it started to look a little old. So then I tried to recustomize it, and it wasn't great. And then they like started cutting out a lot of customization options. So then I just picked one of their templates and tweaked it a little bit. That's one of their sort of built-in templates is what that is.
Okay. No, it's pretty cool. I didn't realize at first what I was doing. Honestly, when and I clicked up to the top here. So on the left was a drop down where you can go to like mosaic or you can choose something else. I saw the term magazine. I'm like, oh, so this is a magazine. And then I'm like, wait a second, these are all different.
No, that's the that's the style. That's
because I realized afterwards, I'm like, that's the same content. And then I see like the silhouette of, just use my Lions as an example. So Dan Campbell and such, like, how are you putting these silhouettes together of these different players and coaches, or is this something that you just found?
I do that with I use like an editor, like I think I use paint.net. It's like a paint app or like a Photoshop kind of app. And I've tried a lot of different things over time. I've done things where I use the mouse and try and like trace people and then, color things in. And what I've been doing for the past couple of years now is I just like take a color and take the paint bucket that just like dumps all over the place, and I just click somewhere and see how it looks. And if I like it, then I just kind of do that, to sort of splat things all over the place to see if it looks good. And but that's basically what I do. Is I take a picture that exists out there,
Sure.
I make it a square. And the square is for Instagram.
Oh no, that makes sense. Yeah, you're tailoring it to where you're going to place it.
Right. So I make it a square so it looks nice on Instagram, and then I just throw colors at it, and I usually try to pull a color off of it and use that color to splat around too. And I usually try to do 2 or 3 colors, try to make it look kind of cool. And yeah, I do try to make it look like do you know who that is or do you not know who that is? Sort of like it's a mystery who this person is. Ooh. And also, like, there's no copyright there. I'm not using somebody's actual image there. That was the other thing. It's like, I wasn't really sure about how people took pictures of other people and put them all over their website without having some sort of NFL license.
Right.
And I was like, I better just not do that at all. And my art style has changed over the years. And this one, I think it looks pretty good. I had people vote on it and tell me that they like it for the most part. So
yeah, no, I liked it. I mean, I was curious because like you said, some of them are, man, I'm not sure who this is. Dan Campbell for me was easy just because of the way he stands with the headset and everything on him. What's in store for your blog? Maybe not just this season, but maybe possibly into the future. Do you have any plans of projects you want to work on?
I've got a lot.
Okay, maybe lay out for sure what you think is going to happen this year, and then what you hope to accomplish in the next 5 years or something like that.
So like this year, I just want to put out like I'm going through my regular motions right now, which is like when the season starts, I've got all the usual stuff of, here's the players you should keep an eye on that you missed or that, aren't very popular, but you should watch them, see if they're good. Waivers, what matchups look good that week. And then I do little bits of leagues that I'm in and who I'm playing against that week and whatever, So people can see like, hey, I played this game too. And here's how good I am, just so you know. And and if I do bad in that league, oh well, I'm publicizing it.
Right.
Got to choose before you start. But so that's what I do for the whole season. And then if I feel the need to throw in some other series, I will. And I was actually one thing I was thinking about for this next season is, I was going to try and keep track of injury reports a lot more closely and do an injury dump on a regular basis. So then I can really know, because, a guy will play all 17 games, right? But then, he'll be questionable for a lot of them. And he'll have a stretch where he doesn't play very good because he's injured. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, especially if it's a soft tissue injury or something that's slowing him down.
Exactly. It's he'll play the game, but he won't do well. So you won't want to start him. And then after the season, I'll do my review and write up and be like, yeah, he was injured for this stretch of time. And people are like, what are you talking about? Like, he was injured. That's why he didn't do so good. It's like, no, he played all the games. It's like, okay, well, you can be injured and play. You just don't play as well. It happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially in football.
And I wanted to keep better track of that, so I actually had like a log throughout the season of like, hey, this guy had a Q on him for 10 weeks.
That's more challenging too,
And
with how when they changed from the D to the Q to the, like, I understood the perspective, like the initial was probable QP, doubtful, but it made it really challenging taking one of them out there.
Right, probable isn't a thing anymore.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's what I want to do this next season is get a better track of that, because I feel like that would be useful, especially for defense, because nobody cares about defense most of the time. But it's like, oh, I didn't catch it this week, because you don't get a notification about everything, just a lot of things. But it'll be like, oh, well, this team that nobody likes that has a good pass defense, their starting corner is out. It's like, oh, okay, so now it's not as bad a matchup as I thought. That's the kind of thing I just want to get just a little bit better of, like, catching those kinds of things. So then I can make a better start or recommendation that week.
It made me think of something where, because you keep a standard depth chart, and because just by hearing the names of players, especially the different kinds of teams, you don't know their first or second string cornerback. But if you had like a checker that verified between the two, like, this is a starting cornerback that's out, or a second. Yeah, I could see that being more beneficial to people.
See? Right, and then I was going to roll that into the rest of my articles for the off season. So when I do the review, I can say they had this injury for this many games, or like this guy started at the beginning of the season and started at the end of the season, or like was a starter once a month when these checks came through, but it's like he missed every other game. I would know that at least and be like, hey, they might be a better team next year even without a change here, because they'll just be healthier.
Right.
So, and I would have some evidence of that versus just like this one page on the other big sites that's just all the injuries this week.
Yeah, especially when you're looking for like the inactives and stuff, like Sunday morning at 11:30 to, well, for you 10:30, I guess, but to try to figure out, okay, who's really not playing, and you see all these different names, and a lot of them are just, okay, backups. And then you see a big star's name for, okay, well, that one matters, and then maybe those cornerbacks or whatever it may be. Well, I also wonder, I'm sure that somebody out there has this, but like the equation for what each center means to the overall rushing yards per game, or like a factor of the guard being, I'm sure that's out there somewhere.
Yeah. I was looking for that, but I couldn't find it for free. Mm-hmm. Maybe you can, I don't know, but I found a lot of websites that have that kind of stuff, but you have to pay for it.
Oh, that's the paywall stuff. Okay.
Yeah. I did want to get a lot of offensive line stats, because that would be good. Like time till the quarterback gets hit.
Yeah.
Or like, I can get some basic stuff like sacks allowed and whatever, but it's...
but if you get that extra stuff...
like yards created would be great. Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, this guy pushes people really hard, and he gives the running back 2 yards, but just by being there,
Yeah, or if like it's something to do with like maybe correlation of time to pass is reduced, so then maybe the uptick in running back catches is 1.3 factor increase, whatever, any kind of reasoning for finding that extra edge like you talked about, especially in like a DFS perspective.
Oh yeah, DFS would be good. Everybody likes money.
Yeah, well, that, and it's because it's like so nuanced where you can change your roster so much from week to week, as opposed to like really how much difference are you going to be like, I don't know, I have... just trying to use a couple. I have 3 receivers and I'm choosing between whatever, Adam Thielen that week and Romeo Dobbs or something like that. They're both maybe about the same, but am I really going to worry that much about a tackle being out to make the difference? Maybe, but a lot of times those little guys like that aren't going to make a big difference.
No, right. But yeah, that's the kind of thing I'd like to have a track on. And yeah, like you said, what I might do is do like a screen scrape of their website and just pull all the injured players and then drop that into like a spreadsheet. Compare that spreadsheet to a spreadsheet of all the starters or guys who are supposed to be starters, and see, how many starters are out. That would be a good thing to know.
Yeah, some kind of, and I'm not really I'm not really great with this. I'm like a pivot table or something where it like automatically it did the comparison chart and then it like somehow pivoted and like color coded. Hey, green is or whatever. Green is all your starters. Yellow is all your secondary players or whatever it might be, something like that. But now I'm getting off track trying to give you ideas versus like your origin story. What about other places that you do you write for other places ever, or is it just for your site alone?
I haven't. No, not really. No, I don't think I've published anything for anybody else.
Okay, well, let's flip that question then. So maybe more of a, if you could write for somebody, or also like, who do you maybe follow that you really appreciate in the industry that you want to give some more love to?
I don't know. See, this is another thing is I don't read a whole lot of other people's stuff, and because it affects me, you know.
Sure.
If I absorb too much of other people's information, then it messes with my process and my information. So and I've noticed that the past couple of years that I like a few mistakes I make here and there. It's like, why did I do that? It's like, oh, it's because I followed this person's advice. It's like, okay.
That or this guy on the podcast yelled the loudest tonight.
Right. And it's like, you know, do I want to go after that person and tell them how stupid and wrong they are? No, it's more like their process is probably different than my process. So their advice doesn't fit with my process because they don't know what I'm doing to get my results. And I don't know what they're doing to get, you know? So when we try to tell each other,
it's a good way to look at it.
Change these things. It's like, that doesn't fit, you know? Yeah.
You know, it's very interesting actually that you say you really don't listen to other people or watch, because then that means that your content alone is, even though it is obviously replicated or duplicated because of there's only so many different ways you can talk about a player, but it's like real, it's honest, it's unique to you, and it's not like you're being influenced. So with that being said, do you ever consider maybe any other forms of medium other than writing, or is that not really something you're interested in?
Writing works good for me now, and it's what I started with. And, you know, I have thought about either making like a podcast or a video sort of format, but like, I don't know exactly how much time that would take me. I don't think I'm ready to just jump into that either. You know, I've been busy with life, you know, where I don't have a whole lot of spare time like I used to. So if I started years ago, I'd probably be doing that, but, you know, not now. But yeah, so part of that goal was like, I draw a bunch of those pictures, right? But I don't do a ton of them. I was trying to find a whole bunch of extra time to just do like every player. I don't do quite every player. I just do a good handful. Like if I write an article about 5 guys, I'll pick one and draw a picture of him for a picture for that article. Versus, you know, doing all 5 every week.
But then you can keep that picture, you keep that in an archive then, right? Yeah. So then like if you want to refer back to that player, so at least you're building your inventory.
Yes, I am. Okay. Exactly. I am building my inventory over time. And I do try to pick the younger guys if I can.
Right.
So I was trying to go for that. And then I could almost just read my article out loud. Call it a podcast.
Oh, no, yeah.
And then take the
Some
pictures.
People do that.
Put that over that. Now it's a video, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, that's something that, I obviously with timing and stuff, I get that because podcasting takes time, but it is a form of medium that a lot of people can, you know, especially because you have a unique perspective. Too bad you don't have old guys, because Ryan Fitzmagic would be the perfect candidate for one of your photos. You got to create one just to have it.
I think I may have made one of him.
With the beard and the chain and everything, because that would be supreme.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I don't have one of them in my current style. I may have made one in the older style where it's not as good looking.
Of course, I guess back in the day, yeah, because he was so popular for a short period.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you might have had him on there.
He was one of my favorite quarterback value picks for a long time. He was a garbage time hero. That's, you know.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, because he would throw 3 interceptions to have to throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, it was awesome. Like, especially on the Bills. For when he was the starter for the Bills for a while, that's when I had him a lot. And, yeah. People were like, he sucks. I'm like, I won.
Yeah, he might not win a lot of games, but man, he sure can
he
win
put
for
up
your
the
fantasy
points.
team.
So did,
and at that point,
what was the Jaguars quarterback? Blake Bortles.
Oh, Bortles, yeah, Jake the Snake Bortles,
yeah. He was not good.
We had some other guys too out there.
But,
I mean, even Stafford did the same thing.
Yeah,
for me, he put up ungodly numbers, but it was because the team sucked, and he'd throw like a pick six, and then he'd have to throw 2 touchdowns.
The team wasn't good. The defense was really bad. They'd just throw a ton, and he'd get a ton of points.
Yep. So, okay, I know you said that, okay, maybe the media might change in the future, but like for now, let's tell the listener of the show where they can find your work, and maybe even if they wanted to get in touch with you.
So for now, jakesffootball.com is my website. You go there anytime, all the time. There's a lot of stuff to read. I make at least 4 articles a week, sometimes more. And then the same at Jake's F Football on Twitter. That's where I'm most popular right now. I believe it's the same thing on Instagram as well. I have a Facebook page, but nobody uses Facebook. Yeah, that's about it.
All right, cool. So listener of the show's got to check out your work. I got to reach out to you with maybe some suggestions. And now we're going to play a game. One more DeLorean question. You're going to go 20 years into the future. You know, that whole Gray's Almanac thing. But this would be a different perspective. So now maybe predict what might be different or what you wish would happen in fantasy football industry from 20 years from now.
Oh. So what has been becoming more common is more people are adding IR spots. And every once in a while I see people talk about this online, and we shoot some ideas back and forth. And some ideas about, like, setting a reserve player or something like that. And what I would mean by that is, like, you'd have, like, a bench spot dedicated to a guy you could swap later on, if that makes sense. So,
you
like,
mean in the game? Or go ahead, you're about to explain it.
Right, like if somebody gets injured mid-game or like right after the game starts, your guys are locked. And the guy that you have in gets hurt. And it's like, okay, well, since I set a reserve guy, he gets swapped in over the injured guy. It's like, oh, that'd be, something like that. Reduce the pain a little bit.
No, I'm with you, because I think even some of the DraftKings stuff for some of their little tournament draft, there's something that they have, like where you do like the snake drafts. I think they have a reserve player for that specific reason. Yeah,
and right, something like that. I see things changing in the future.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's going to be, who knows what's going to happen. I mean, we didn't realize. I mean, I guess 20 years ago, sure, there was the internet, but like fantasy football on the internet 20 years ago, I don't know.
20 years
being
ago,
able to draft
scoring was hot stuff. Everybody loved it.
I mean, you're able to, like, 20 years ago, you never would have imagined that you could sit on the toilet and draft your team. Driving down the road and draft your team.
It was before smartphones, yeah.
So it's just, we'll see what happens in the future. And speaking of that, and because you have this site that with tons of information for it, how about we leave with last words of fantasy football knowledge nuggets, maybe like through the lens of somebody who's taken on this task of writing his own blog. Like, what would you give to a listener that might want to be interested in starting their own?
I would say you want to be unique in what you want to do, something different than what other people do. Because if you just regurgitate other things other people say and do similar things to everybody else, then, it's not going to be all that interesting.
There you go. Don't let people's opinions persuade your own convictions. And if you're going to get into the industry, do something unique and make sure that it's interesting. I hope you enjoyed this week's trip down memory lane to learn about another fantasy football origin story. And if you have your own story to share, head over to fantasyfootballoriginstories.com and hit us up on the contact page. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Fantasy Football Origin Stories. To make sure you're the first to get the next episode, please make sure to mash that little subscribe or follow button on your podcast player of choice, then head over to the website for the show notes and more fantasy football origin stories. That's at fantasyfootballoriginstories.com. And remember, dudes, where we're going, we don't need roads. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.